This isn't a mangle. This is a killer jukebox. What it kills is my wallet, because it's cost a lot to keep it in running condition. But I love machines, and at the same time I'm terrified of machines. And at the time that I was publishing my first short stories, I was teaching, and I was working in a laundry at the same time. And they had a mangle in the laundry. It's a speed ironer and folder. You put in a dirty sheet or a wrinkled sheet, and it comes out pressed and nice. And my mother had also worked in a laundry, and she'd worked on that machine. And there was a man in the laundry, a guy named Harry Cross, who didn't have hands. He had hooks. And in the summertime, he would go into the men's room and turn on the hot water and the cold water and hold his hooks underneath, so that one got very hot and the other one was very cold. And then he'd come up behind you and put them on the back of your neck and scare you. And what had happened to Harry, I got this story one lunch hour, was that during World War II, when there weren't very many people to do maintenance, he had been crawling over the mangle while it was running, fixing some electrical cables. He fell off the beam he was on and fell into the machine, and the machine took his hands up to the elbows, just simply pulled them in, and the machine ran over them, and the flesh bulged up and then finally split and splattered all over everything. And they cut him out with a fire axe. And the story was so horrible that I knew I had to write it immediately. So machines don't like us, you know. Machines don't like us at all, which is why people get electrical shocks from toasters. It's why our cars break down when we need them the most and it's rainy at night. It's why whenever we really want to show a friend a videotape, the machine eats the tape. I don't know anybody, you know, whose machines work all the time. It simply doesn't happen.
What book do you like yourself the most?
I think Misery is probably my favorite. I think it's the one that works the best.
Can I say it's a kind of a psychological, more in-depth book than, for instance, Christine, about a car?
Yes. Misery and Cujo are horror stories that could happen. And I think with Misery, which is a story about a writer being held prisoner by his number one fan, who's a psychotic nurse, that it's a little bit more unlikely. And we know that celebrities can be targets. There's what happened to John Lennon, for instance. And so it was a chance for me to do a couple of things, to talk a little bit about the sort of unhealthy relationship a lot of fans have with either writers, whether they're writers or whether they're pop stars or whether they're movie stars, whatever. There's a sort of unhealthy relationship and interest on what goes on. And I think that if you asked all sorts of young girls if you could have Michael Jackson prisoner in your basement, they'd say, give me the chains, I'll chain him up.
But I mean, the author in your book, he becomes dependent on Novril. It's a medicine which doesn't exist.
No, it's a make-believe drug, but you can substitute your own favorite barbiturate. I'm sure that, you know.
I mean, are you fascinated by mental diseases?
To some degree, I am. I've always been a little bit afraid of going crazy myself. Vampires, werewolves, I don't believe in those things, but I believe in murderers. I believe in the stranger that might come to your house in the middle of the night and knock on the door and then come in and kill you. A vampire is a life stealer. A murderer is a life stealer. One is a metaphor for the other. And a vampire is a little bit safer because we know that that's make-believe, and we can laugh at our own fears and say, well, I pretended for a while. You understand what I mean? When there are real things to be afraid of.
So you agree with...
My view is that the monsters always get us in the end. The monster might be cancer. The monster might be a stroke. The monster might be a heart attack. But in the end, the monsters will get me, and the monsters will get you.
So you very much agree with Edgar Allan Poe, who said that the worst things, or let's say atrocities, which are hidden in one's soul, in one's mind, it's worse.
The biggest fears are too large to escape our mouths. Even in a scream, when our mouths stretch open all the way, the very large fears can't escape. The fear of the deaths of loved ones, the fear of some horrible disease where we'll waste or rot away a little bit at a time. These are things we're all afraid of, but they're in our hearts and they're in our nerves.
Is there a difference towards horror between adults and children, the way people can handle it?
I think there's a big difference between the way adults deal with horror and children. Children know what they're afraid of, but don't always know how to express it. Adults can express what they're afraid of if they know what it is, and they may not. And if I give a child in one of my stories a gift, like in The Shining, Danny's ability to shine, to see the future, Carrie White's telekinesis, you know, that's another way of saying to the reader, look at your own child. What gifts does your own child have? Have you noticed the way your child thinks? Because kids don't think straight. They think around corners. They're bent. They're bent. I was thinking that the other day, you know. I was taking a walk around my block, and as I walked up toward the corner, there was a little girl in a little frock sitting in the dust by the side of the road, talking to herself. Now, what would somebody think if they saw you sitting in the dust at the side of the road and talking to yourself? Or me? They'd think we were crazy. But with children, we expect that. We allow our children to be crazy until they're about 8, and then we start to say, why don't you grow up? Grow up. And they do. They do grow up. They become doctors. They become engineers. They become sailors, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. What happens to their imaginations? Shrinks. As their bodies grow, their ability to imagine, to the whole range, the whole world of wonders begins to shrink in on them. You understand what I mean? You pay a price to grow up. It's a high price. And with adults, can you teach them to use their imaginations again? Yes, I think you can. I think one of the reasons they come to my books is because what I'm trying to say to them is, look, use your imagination again.
Any idea why sexuality is always linked to evil things? I mean, the desire seems to be the devil.
Well, we understand it as one of the biggest impulses that's inside our physical beings. I think that most of us understand that it can be a tremendously destructive force in our lives. And I think, too, that most of us understand that when we're in deep sexual passion, we're outside of ourselves. We lose control. And for those reasons, we're frightened of it. I think we're frightened of it the way we are of any impulse that's inside us that we can't control. Most of us are very fortunate. The desire that a psychotic might have to commit murder after murder after murder is something that's beyond us. But almost all of us understand what it is to be in a sexual passion and to be beyond the reach of our sane and rational mind. So yeah, I think we're afraid of it.
Any idea why people are feeling guilty about reading horror for some time?
Well, let's face it, on one level it panders to some really aggressive negative impulses. When there are a series of nasty, brutal murders, as there are in the Dead Zone, there's a certain part of the reader that gets off on that. There's a certain part of me that gets off on that, to fantasize, to make believe that one is a serial killer, a mass murderer. So I think that we put it, you know, like that sexual experience. We bound it with a lot of moral ideas. This isn't very good. This is kind of a nasty taste to have. So we put it in strict borders, and I think we're right to do so. Stuff can be dynamite.